So, when the Saviors first pulled up on The Walking Dead, they were straight up terrifying, like no contest. They were the scariest crew that had ever popped up on the show. And let's be real, a lot of that had to do with Negan's big entrance. That whole lineup scene, iconic. He walks out with Lucille, all smug and in control, while his people have Rick's entire crew cornered and helpless, and instantly told you this dude was on a whole other level. Back then, Negan was evil as hell, cracking jokes while bashing skulls. Fans hated him in the best way, but that kind of raw villain energy only worked because the Saviors were that deep and that brutal. They had a massive army, way bigger than Alexandria, the Hilltop, and any other group combined. And on top of the numbers, their whole strategy was cold. They'd roll up on random communities, pick someone to kill just to prove a point, and demand half their stuff like it was rent. It wasn't just survival, it was domination. That's what made them such a threat, and why Rick and everyone had to go all in just to survive against them. But fast forward to Dead City, and things have definitely changed. Negan's now leading a new group called the Barazi, and yeah, they're not even close to the same. Like, sure, Negan still has that dark streak in him. It came out a few times in season 2, but the Barazi, they're not exactly striking fear into hearts the way the Saviors did, especially when you see how everything falls apart by the end of season 2. The Barazi spent most of the season going at it with Bruegel and his people. But once New Babylon stepped into the picture, it was basically game over. These guys were supposed to be the biggest deal in Manhattan. They kidnapped Herschel. They had a whole methane power setup running, but none of that mattered when New Babylon showed up. They came in out of nowhere and just steamrolled the place like it was nothing. No resistance, no drawn out battle, just boom, they took over. Even before that, the Barazi were taking hits. Bruegel's group wiped out a chunk of their numbers, which made it way easier for New Babylon to swoop in and take the whole island. And even though the Barazi had clout in Manhattan, they were still pretty small compared to the massive machine that is New Babylon. These guys didn't just walk in, they dominated it without breaking a sweat. We don't even know how many Barazi survived, but judging by the finale, it's not looking good. What's wild is how fast it all happened. Back in the day, it took multiple seasons, a full-on alliance between different communities and tons of casualties just to bring down Negan and the Saviors. So imagining New Babylon doing the same thing to them? Yeah, not likely. If they were up against the original Saviors, it would have been a whole different story. Bruegel wouldn't have been a problem, and New Babylon would have had to actually fight tooth and nail to get anywhere. Like, even if they did win in the end, it would have been messy. The Saviors would have dragged it out for ages, made them work for every inch of ground, and taken a ton of them down along the way. That's the biggest difference between Negan's old crew and this new one. The Saviors were built for war. The Barazi, not so much. Now, Negan never really wanted to lead the Barazi, not in the way he ran the Saviors, but the whole storyline in Dead City Season 2 kind of forced him into that role. The Dama and the Crowd were basically using him. They knew he had the leadership, that charisma that could pull people together, and even though he tried to keep it cool and not fall back into his old ways, it was only a matter of time. That darkness inside him, yeah, it came back hard in the finale. By the end of the season, Negan went full savage again. He handled the Croat, took out Bruegel, and basically did what he used to do best, lead through fear and violence. It worked, but it also showed that no matter how much he tries to change, there's still that old Negan in there just waiting to come out. And honestly, that's what made the season so interesting. From his point of view, taking control of the Barazi was just a means to an end. He wanted to settle things in Manhattan so he could finally move on and maybe have some kind of peace with his family. But from a story perspective, it was about showing that inner tug of war he's been dealing with. Negan's been trying to bury the past, but the past isn't done with him. Seeing that darker side of him pop back out was probably the best part of season 2. It reminded fans why he's such a complex character, not just some villain or anti hero, but someone always riding the line. And now that Dead City has set the stage, whatever comes next for Negan is bound to be wild. Negan stepping back into that leadership role, even if it wasn't planned, showed that deep down, he's still wired for it. Like he knows how to take control of a group and get stuff done. But at the same time, that instinct to dominate and scare people into submission doesn't just go away because he's trying to be a better person. Leading the Barazi basically put him in a situation where he had to choose between being the guy he used to be or getting steamrolled. And surprise, surprise, the old Negan came out swinging. The thing is, fans kind of wanted to see that version of him again, not necessarily the psychopath that bashes heads in for fun, but the strategic, fearless Negan who doesn't flinch when things get ugly. When he tapped back into that mindset in the finale, it felt like classic Negan, not a full throwback, but just enough of the edge to remind you why he was such a beast in the first place. It added that old damn, he still got it energy to the season. But what's interesting now is that Negan isn't doing this for power anymore. Back with the Saviors, it was all about control, survival of the fittest, and keeping people in line through fear. With the Barazi, it felt more like desperation, like he was backed into a corner and it had to go dark just to keep things from falling apart. He's not trying to build an empire anymore. He's trying to survive, protect the people he cares about, and stop getting dragged into chaos every time he turns around. That's what makes this whole storyline in Dead City so layered. There's this constant tension between who he was, who he's trying to be, and who the world needs him to be in the moment. And unfortunately for him, the world keeps pulling him back into that villain role, even when he's trying to walk that line and stay neutral. People like the Dama and the Croat keep shoving him into positions of power and acting surprised when he burns the whole place down. The Barazi, to be fair, were never really cut out to be the new saviors. They didn't have the same grit or loyalty, and honestly, a lot of them seemed more like followers than fighters. Negan might have been able to shape them into something tougher over time, but he never really got the chance. Things escalated way too fast, especially once Brugal started making moves and New Babylon came crashing in like a wrecking ball. And let's talk about New Babylon for a sec. They're on another level. We don't know everything about them yet, but they rode into Manhattan like they've been planning it for months. No hesitation, no warning, just total takeover. Compared to the slow, drawn out wars we saw with the Saviors, this felt like a blitz. You gotta remember, the Saviors had outposts, supply chains, inside intel, and most importantly, Negan's iron grip. Everyone followed orders or paid the price. That kind of structure makes a group tough to beat. The Barazi didn't have that. They were more of a loose alliance than a military unit, and once things started unraveling, there was no backup plan. Once New Babylon got a foothold, it was a wrap. Still, it's kind of wild to think that Negan, the guy who once ruled the apocalypse with a baseball bat, ended up leading a group that got wiped out like that. It says a lot about how much the world has changed since the early days of The Walking Dead. The rules are different now. Power isn't just about numbers or intimidation, it's about staying one step ahead. And honestly, Negan's out here playing chess while half these new factions are already onto 4D strategy games. What Dead City does really well is show how even someone like Negan struggles to keep up. He's not invincible anymore. He's still dangerous, but the world around him is evolving faster than he is. That vulnerability makes him way more interesting now. He's not just the big bad anymore. He's the guy constantly fighting to stay relevant in a world that's getting more complicated and cutthroat by the day. And now that the Barazi are done for, it kind of resets the board. Negan's back to square one in a way. He doesn't have a crew, he's burned a few bridges, and his whole I'm just trying to live a quiet life dream is looking real shaky right now. But if there's one thing we know about him, it's that he doesn't go down easy. He always finds a way to crawl back out of the mess, even if it means tapping into parts of himself he swore he left behind. So the big question now is, where does he go from here? With New Babylon running things and his enemies mostly dead, Negan might finally have a shot at starting fresh again. But knowing him, it won't be that simple. There's always someone waiting in the shadows to drag him back into the chaos, and honestly, as long as that conflict keeps bringing out the best and worst of him, we're all here for it. But anyway, y'all, I'll see you in the next one.